Hello! Today I'd like to show you one trick I'm currently using when I weave such forms, first widening and then narrowing. This masterclass will be first of all useful for newbies and for those masters who haven't tried weaving such forms yet, like such a pot, for example. What's the essence of this masterclass? Previously I used to weave differently and I disliked the result. I used to widen the form by means of distributing the poles, like we do while weaving bottoms. Well, let me show you on the example of my old work. I used to start weaving in a regular way, then added one more pole to each and finally separated them. This transition catches the eye and makes the item look a bit untidy. At least I always felt unsatisfied with such results. Well, maybe someone has already discussed this trick, but I've tried it myself and I'd like to share it with you. In order to cut it short, we start in a normal way. In my case, I've placed two pairs of tubes crosswise. Then, after having woven a few rows, I'm starting to insert additional poles. In the next row, I'm going to distribute them until the required diameter of a bottom. After which, I'll join the bottom to the form with the help of such a thin elastic band. Then I raise the poles and weave a few rows, 4 or 5. It is where the weaving starts widening and I have to make it denser somehow. What do? I insert additional poles. I use halves of poles for this purpose. Anyway, I'm going to trim the edge separately. I insert the tube so that the cuts weren't seen. Take a look, please. I adjoin the cut to the previous pole. One more thing. It is very important to add poles always from the same side. Otherwise, the widening won't be neat and will be visible. So first join additional pole to each existing one from the right. I've woven a few more rows and I see the intervals are getting bigger. In order to reduce the intervals, there's not much left for widening. I insert more additional poles. This time I join them to the left from the short pole. With the cut, adjoin to the pole again, so that the cuts weren't seen in case of any gaps. In my case, I don't apply any glue because there's no point in it. I'm not going to distribute or drag the poles. They'll get fastened by the following rows. This way, with the cut toward the inside. And continue this way until the end of the row. Now I have triple poles and I continue entwining them in a rope-like technique. As you can see, the intervals have gotten smaller. Such intervals are quite sufficient to weave neatly until the end of the widening. So I've reached the point where the form stops widening. The intervals between the poles are about 2 centimeters, a bit less than 1 inch. Now I'm going to take the foam out and weave a few rows. Well, it depends on the shape of a pot you'd like to get. You may start rounding the foam right away, leaning the pose toward the center. But I usually weave 2 or 3 rows straight after taking the foam out, and then I start narrowing the pot. So you may narrow your work sharply or gradually depending on the desired shape. So take the foam out and now weave directing the pose upwards. The next stage, after rounding the shape a little, will be getting rid of the short pose. So at first we were adding poles. Now while narrowing the shape, I'm going to get rid of these central poles. I'll be removing the central poles everywhere, cause otherwise the pattern will get fuzzy. We want the poles shaping the pattern to remain straight. Continue weaving. Some central poles are gradually getting to knot by themselves. Where they are too long, I cut them off. Here the pole is over, so that I don't have to cut it. Then I entwine double poles and shape the band, kind of pushing them toward the center. Remove the central tubes neatly. And weave, shaping the band inwards. I've reached the starting point of the weaving. Tuck in the tube tails like this while finishing. There's enough space here, the tubes get inside well and fasten tightly. Leave the second working tube here. Tighten. Got it. Now I cut off every right pole. As for the left poles, I soften them a little and lead them outwards. It is the way I finish weaving. I'm not going to show you the way I trim the edge. You can watch the edge trimming technique at Alena Bugrova's channel. I like her techniques very much. Yelena Gayanova also offers her edge trimming methods. Well, she proposes a bit different ways of weaving, but the essence is the way she trims the edge. Such edge trimming techniques are to my liking, and I am mostly applying them lately. So I'm preparing the pot edge for trimming. Well, I've tried to trim the edges of such pots differently, but they don't look so harmonious. I find this very edge trimming technique optimal for such pots. One, two, Lead the last tube tail this way. Now smoothen the edge like this and cut off the excessive tails. Try not to cut the tails too short. Well, the trimming coils will fasten the tails anyway, but it will be better if the board will hold the tail. So I perform the cut opposite the following tube. And so on. I'll cut off the rest of the tails and trim the edge. So let's sum up. The essence of this masterclass is how to perform widening and then narrowing neatly so that the poles remain straight. For this purpose, I always add the poles from one and the same side. For example, to the right from the existing poles at first, and then during the next lengthening to the left. When you start narrowing the item, remove the central poles. The remaining two poles will be gradually meted neatly without breaking the straight vertical line. I've come to these conclusions based on my own experience. At first I used to add poles at random, and it was quite noticeable on the resultant works. The poles were not straight but rather wavy. Gradually, by trial and error, I found this technique and I've decided to share it with you. I'll be happy if any of you will find this idea useful.